Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he's going to live the rest of his life now under al-mutawakkil. Okay? Alright? And when al-mutawakkil takes over, subhanAllah, he didn't hold anything against Ahmad rahimahullah. He almost felt like it was important for him to endorse Imam Ahmad's madhab from behind the scenes, because of everything that had been done to Imam Ahmad by his family. So al-mutawakkil really, praises Imam Ahmad in public much. He continues to give to his sons to make sure that their lives are okay. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he didn't boycott his sons, by the way. He just refused to have anything eaten from their household because he knew that it was coming from the government. I made a mistake. I said that he stayed only married to Salih for that time. He stayed married to her for a long time, just her, but he did marry the mother of Abdullah as well, because it just from the age of Abdullah, even though some narrations say it was the entire time, it doesn't make sense. Abdullah was clearly a mature man by the time Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is reaching the time of his death. But anyway, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah becomes the absolute most famous scholar of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We said that some of his halaqas would be 5,000. It's narrated that one of his halaqas by Imam al-Marwadi, he says one of his halaqas reached over 50,000 people. That it was the largest gathering in Baghdad that they'd ever seen before, and it was just a halaqa. It wasn't even like a special summit or anything like that, but that's just how much his fame reached the entire world. And he said every time Imam Ahmad rahimahullah tried to push fame away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doubled his attendance, right? Doubled the attendance to his halaqas. Now, as Imam Ahmad rahimahullah reached the end of his life, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is still writing very actively, still very active in the pursuit of hadith. He's into his 70s. And he has a very famous statement. Someone asked him, they said, aren't you going to take a break? You're in your late 70s now. He's been through a lot. Aren't you going to take a break, sort of retire now and rest and let your students do the collecting and the teaching? And he had a very famous statement. He said, مَعَ الْمَحْبَرَةِ إِلَى الْمَقْبَرَةِ مَعَ الْمَحْبَرَةِ إِلَى الْمَقْبَرَةِ, which is from the ink pot to the grave. From the ink pot to the grave. I'll stay writing and I'll stay in this knowledge until I go to my grave. I'm never going to give it up. And we find that Salih and his children narrate what was happening in the time of his death. Salih says, and Salih was the oldest son, so he was the one that was entrusted to him, that Imam Ahmad was entrusted to. He says that when Imam Ahmad rahimahullah fell ill and he was very old and very sick, he says, Arad al-Qiyam, all he wanted to do was pray Qiyamul Layl. So he said, Khudh bi yadi, he said, take my hand. فَلَمَّا صَارَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, and when he would get to his salah, ضَعُفَتْ رِجْلَهُ حَتَّى تَوَكَّأَ عَلَيَّ, that he would lose strength in his legs, and obviously from the damage that was done to him and the torture as well, his legs took they used to torture the legs a lot. So he used to lean on him, he would lean on him even as he would go into his salah. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would pray sitting down, but he would constantly stay in his qiyam. He also narrates that a man came to him from his neighbors, and the man was crying. And this is it's really amazing, subhanAllah, the heart of this man. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah. He comes in crying. And he says, Oh Abu Abdullah, Ana kuntu mimman hadara darbak yawm ad-dar. I was one of the people that attended, that was part of the beating of you when you were in prison. I was one of those guards that was doing so. And he's crying and he's very emotional. He says, وَقَدْ آتَيْتُكَ فَإِنْ أَحْبَبْتَ الْقَصَاصِ فَأَنَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْكَ. He said, I've come to you. If you want to take your revenge on me, then go ahead and take it. Have me beaten, have me tortured. Do what you want to me. Go ahead and take it. He said, وَإِنْ رَأَيْتَ أَن تَحُلَّنِي فَعَلْتَ. And if you want to forgive me, then you do so. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he was laying down. He was very old. He rose up and he said to him, عَلَى أَلَّا تَعُودَ لِمِثْلِ ذَلِكَ. He said, on the condition that you will never return to this post of yours, meaning being someone that tortures on the part of the government and becomes a guard who tortures the ulama. He says, عَلَى أَلَّا تَعُودَ لِمِثْلِ ذَلِكَ. And he said, نعم. He said, yes, I will never go back to it. قَالَ إِنِّي جَعَلْتُكَ فِي حِلْ. He said, I've left you forgiven. He says, Salih says that فَخَرَجَ يَبْكِي وَبَكَ مَنْ حَضَرَ مِنَ النَّاسِ. He said that he left crying and everyone in the gathering was crying, meaning everyone in the house of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah was crying, seeing the regret on this man's face when he says, I was one of those people that actually hit you. The same thing he did, subhanAllah, to the man who backbited him, that you don't return to that sin. I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you as well. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah also, one thing that about him is that he would never groan, like he wouldn't make what's called anin al-marid. Anin al-marid are, the moaning or the groaning. When you're sick and you start, and you make those types of noises. Salih said that Imam Ahmad never moaned. He never had those anin. And they asked him why, because you could clearly see the pain on his face, but Imam Ahmad would never make noise. He said, because I heard Tawus say that Ibn Abbas said that anin al-marid, that the crying or the moaning of the one who is sick is shakwallah, is complaining about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said that it's not from a person who's patient to make noises and to scream and to moan and to groan and to say and ooh. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would stay very quiet. And he says that I used to sleep next to him. Salih says I used to sleep next to him. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, I would see the pain on his face as he was about to die. And he got to a point where he couldn't even really talk, and he would instead he would tap me on the arm and he would signal something to me, and I would go get it or I would go do it for him. So he needed to be moved, to use the restroom. He needed to have things brought to him and things of that sort. And he says that Mujahid ibn Musa, there was a man that entered named Mujahid ibn Musa. And Mujahid ibn Musa rahimahullah entered and he said, Ya Aba Abdullah, قد جاءتك البشرى هذا الخلق يشهدون لك ما تبالي لو وردت على الله ساعة لو وردت على الله الساعة. He said, Ya Ahmad, Bushra, he said, look at you, look at this. He says, all of these people, because the people were waiting outside his house, he had constant visitors, said, all of these people are going to testify on your behalf on the Day of Judgment. You shouldn't mind, even if you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala today. وَجَعَلَ يُقَبِّلُ يَدَهُ وَيَبْكِي. And the man started to kiss his hand, Mujahid started to kiss his hand, and he started to cry. And Salih says that my father, even though he was nearly paralyzed, he said his mind was still sharp. He said he simply looked at him and he said Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would simply look to me and he would say, Kam yawm fi shahr, what day is it, and things of that sort. It just got to very simple words, but he said his mind was still very much present in what was going on. One of the things that also took place on his deathbed is the conversations between him and his children, which are very, very profound. I said this in the beginning, that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah had a child 50 days before his death. There was a child that was born to him 50 days before his death. And Imam Ahmad saw him. Imam Ahmad was already sick. So they said, what do you name him? He said, Sa'id, happy. Like name him the happy, because he brought happiness, right? There was some good news at the end of his life, that Sa'id was born. And he had another name, he had another son named Muhammad. So he had this baby, 50-day-old baby, and he had another son that was his brother from the same mother named Muhammad. And he told him to come close to him, and he was still a young boy. And he kissed him on the forehead, and he says, "Ma kuntu asna'u biwaladi ala kibar as-sin." What am I going to do with this young son of mine? What am I going to gain from having this young boy? And I'm so old. Ala kibar as-sin. So Salih said to him, "Dhurriya takuna bi'adadika yad'una lak." He said, this is offspring. They'll grow up, and they'll have children, and they'll all make du'a for you. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah said, وَذَاكَ إِنْ حَصَلْ وَجَعَلَ يَحْمِدُ اللَّهِ. He said, if that happens, and he started to say Alhamdulillah, meaning that would be amazing if that happens. If they grow up and they make du'a for me and their children make du'a for me and things of that sort. He said that وَكَانَ فِي خَرِيقَتِهِ قُطَيْعَاتٍ. He had with him, in his sleeve or in his pocket, he had like little pieces. And what it means is here, darahim, like little dirhams, like a little bit of money, like pennies if you will. He had some pennies with him. So he would say to me, go buy this and go buy that. And when he had some, he would say, go take this to the poor. And then Salih said he had 1 dirham that was left in his pocket. And he said, go buy a date with it and give it as kafarat yameen. Meaning there's some oath that I might have taken, and I wanted to serve as an expiation. So I did so. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he noticed that he had nothing left. And he fulfilled everything that he wanted to. He gave what he wanted to out. So he said, Alhamdulillah. And he started to give me his wasiyah. The wasiyah of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, you want to talk about a staunch man with integrity? We mentioned Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. They're very similar on their approach to government. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that I want us to be buried only, or I want me to be buried only from our finances as a family. And he said, do not even let the clothes that are used for me be provided by the Khalifa. I don't want anything from the government. SubhanAllah, nothing from them that's going to be used in my janazah, nothing from them that's going to be used to provide for me. And he said he continued to pray and he continued to lean on me and things of that sort. And then we have a conversation between him and Abdullah. Abdullah, the son of Ahmad, comes to him and he says, seeing him in this pain, he says, Ya Abi, mata raha. When will we find comfort? When will we find comfort? He says, إِذَا وَضَعْتَ قَدَمَكَ فِي الْجَنَّةِ ارْتَحْتَ. When you get your foot in Jannah, you rest. Until then, there's no rest. SubhanAllah. Until your foot enters into Jannah, then you rest. In another narration, he says, بِأَوَّلِ خُطْوَةٍ نَخْطُوهَا فِي الْجَنَّةِ. With the first step that we take into Jannah is ar-raha. Now, another thing that we see is when he was passing away, SubhanAllah, this is also Abdullah sees him, and this was at the point of his life where he was going between unconsciousness and consciousness. He would open his eyes, then he'd fall back, and then so on and so forth. And Abdullah says that I was telling him to say La ilaha illallah, as the Prophet ﷺ said, to prompt your dead or your dying ones to say La ilaha illallah. So I was telling him to say La ilaha illallah, and he was saying La ba'd, no, not yet, or Laysa ba'd, not yet. So he said, I was concerned about him. So when he fully gained his consciousness, I said to him, I was telling you to say La ilaha illallah and you were saying no, not yet. And he said, I saw shaitan in a dream or in a vision. And shaitan was telling me that, oh Ahmad, I've never been able to get you. He appeared in a very humiliated way. And he's like, you've escaped me. Like, I give up on you. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is saying, no, not yet. Meaning death has not yet come. And until death, the war stays between me and you. SubhanAllah, like I'm going to continue fighting the shaitan until the moment that I breathe my last. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he passes away on the day of Jum'ah, the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, okay, which is the day the Prophet ﷺ was born, and according to some scholars, the day he passed away as well. Okay, actually it was definitely the day he passed away ﷺ. There's difference of opinion on what day he was born ﷺ, but Imam Ahmad rahimahullah dies on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, on the day of Friday, like Shafi'i did as well. And this is in Baghdad in the year 241 after Hijrah. He was 77 years old, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And subhanAllah, you look at his janazah, all right? There were 100 people from Banu Hashim, meaning the family of the Prophet ﷺ and so on and so forth, the leftovers of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, that did his ghusl, just his ghusl. 100 family members of the Prophet ﷺ from Banu Hashim that came to do his ghusl. The Muslim world came from all over. I mean, as soon as anyone that heard about Imam Ahmad, anyone that lived in Iraq, they immediately, started to make their way to Baghdad when they heard that he passed away. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, as he passed away, he has what Ibn Kathir rahimahullah says, and Al-Dhahabi says, what is no doubt the largest janazah in the history of Islam. The largest janazah in the history of Islam. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah says that it was no less than 1.3 million people. Okay? Now back then, by the way, just think of it this way. When Pope John Paul passed away, 1 million people attended his funeral. And that was with all the announcements and things of that sort. 1.3 million people came to attend the janazah of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. He said the men, the women, the children, the people came from all over the Muslim world. And it took an entire week. If you wanted to make his janazah, basically the people lined up and they did so many janazahs that it took an entire week for the last person of that congregation to pray janazah on him. So the groups kept coming and praying janazah on him, and they waited and to visit his grave and pray janazah on him over and over and over and over again until it took an entire week for that 1.3 million to finish. On top of that, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, he narrates, he says that, and this is one of those narrations that just makes you go, like, that's crazy. Okay? Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that there were over 10,000 non-Muslims that became Muslim because of the janazah of Imam Ahmad. Over 10,000 people from the Christians, the Jews, the Majus that accepted Islam because of his janazah. Meaning seeing the people come for this man, they said that this man is a sign from God. And they, seeing the amount of, seeing the manners of the Muslims, the way they loved Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, hearing about Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, it made them come to Islam. And subhanAllah, there's something else here, by the way. If you remember what he said to Ahmad ibn Abi Du'at. He said that the truth will show at our janazas. Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, when he passed away, no one wanted to pray on him and no one wanted to bury him. They buried him after 9 days because his body started to rot. And so the Khalifa appointed someone to go and take his body and put it away because no one wanted to wash him or pray janazah on him. The amount of anger that they had towards him because of what he did to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, no one wanted to give him any regard. And in fact, through Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, the Mu'tazila, really the institution of the Mu'tazila died. They just became pockets after that. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah really killed that movement. He dealt a blow to that movement that would never come back. And something else, and Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah narrates, وَكَذَلِكَ الذَّهَبِ. He says, and this is really another one of those narrations, subhanAllah, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he had 3 hairs from the hairs of the Prophet ﷺ. Now by the way, disclaimer, when you keep hearing of these gatherings of the hair of the Prophet ﷺ, it is absolutely false. It's garbage. It's not hair of the Prophet ﷺ. When you keep hearing about them, like they seem to be everywhere. Okay? Very few people actually kept something of the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, somehow through his family, whatever it may be, had 3 hairs from the Prophet ﷺ. He ordered that one be put on his tongue and one on each of his eyes when he's buried. Why is that? Imam al-Muzani rahimahullah ta'ala says, كَأَنَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَن يَقُولُ لَمْ أَنطِقْ وَلَمْ أَعْمَلْ إِلَّا بِسُنَّتِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. I did not say or see or do anything other than your sunnah, Ya Rasulullah. So he wanted to be buried with those hairs that were left over from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Salih, the son of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he says that when Imam Ahmad rahimahullah passed away, he said that I had a house, and in that house, basically, I was married and we had just a few possessions. We weren't a rich family, we were very poor. He said that one day my house burned down. And he said, Wallahi, the only thing I was worried about was not any of the furniture or anything that was in the house. He said, but it was a shirt. It was one of my dad's shirts that I inherited from him that I used to wear. It was one of the shirts of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah that I used to wear. And he said that I used to wear it to remind myself of him. وَأَتَشَمَّمْ بِرَائِحَتِهِ. I smell his scent. He had a scent, rahimahullah ta'ala. So I would smell my father's scent when I wore that shirt. And he said, when the house burned down, that's all I cared about. And when they went into the home, the only thing that wasn't burned was the shirt. So he still kept that shirt, subhanAllah. He made dua to Allah when he saw his house burning, just keep me that shirt. I just want the shirt of my dad so I can continue to wear it. One more narration and then we get into his usul and we get into his madhab. This one is from Imam ibn Khuzaymah al-Iskandarani. Imam ibn Khuzaymah al-Iskandarani. He says, لَمَّا مَاتَ Ahmad. So this is a dream he's going to have. Remember, Shafi'i had a dream of Rasulullah ﷺ sending something to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. He says, when Imam Ahmad passed away, اغتممت غما شديدا, that I went into a deep sleep. I was very sad and things of that sort, and I went into a deep sleep. He says, فَرَأَيْتُهُ فِي الْمَنَامِ. I saw Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala in my sleep. وَهُوَ يَتَبَخْتَرُ فِي مَشْيَتِهِ. And he was walking sort of proudly. يَتَبَخْتَرُ meaning that he's walking with a stride. Like he's walking proud. So, قُلْتُ لَهُ يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ. I said to him, Oh Abu Abdullah, أَيُّ مَشْيَةٍ هَذِهِ. What sort of walk is that? We weren't used to seeing this from you. فَقَالَ مِشْيَةِ الْخَدَّامِ فِي دَارِ الْإِسْلَامِ. That's the walk of someone who served in the house of Islam. فَقُلْتُ مَا فَعَلَ اللَّهُ بِكَ. I said, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do with you? He says, غَفَرَ لِي وَتَوَّجَنِي وَأَلْبَسَنِي نَعْلَيْنِ مِنْ ذَهَبٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave me. He took me to Him. He embraced me into His Jannah. And He gave me 2 نَعْلَيْنِ مِنْ ذَهَبٍ, 2 sandals of dhahab, of gold. وَقَالَ لِي يَا أَحْمَدْ. He said to me, O Ahmad, هَذَا بِقَوْلِكَ الْقُرْآنِ كَلَامِي. This is because you said that the Qur'an is my word. This is because of the fitna that you went through. And for you saying that Al-Qur'an كلامي. ثم قال لي يا أحمد ادعوني بتلك الدعوات التي بلغتك عن سفيان الثوري. Allah says to Imam Ahmad, call me with those du'as that you used to ask for in this dunya that you learned from Imam Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala. And Imam Ahmad, and he says, وَكُنْتَ تَدْعُو بِهِنَّ فِي دَارِ الدُّنْيَا. You used to make those du'as in this dunya. What was that dua? Listen to this dua. This is very poetic in the Arabic language as well. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri had a dua that Imam Ahmad learned. And the dua was, and it came from Sufyan al-Thawri to Sufyan ibn Uyayna to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. Ya Rabb, O my Lord, kullu shay'in biqudratika ala kulli shay'. Everything is in your power upon everything. Kullu shay'in biqudratika ala kulli shay'. اغفر لي لكل شيء اغفر لي لكل شيء. Forgive me for everything. حتى لا تسألني عن شيء. So that you don't ask me about anything. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say the dua again. Okay? يا رب كل شيء بقدرتك على كل شيء. اغفر لي كل شيء حتى لا تسألني عن شيء. Isn't that beautiful? Oh Allah, everything is in your power, or your power upon everything, and it encompasses everything. Obviously, it's hard to translate this. اغفر لي كل شيء, forgive me for everything, حتى لا تسألني عن شيء, so that you don't ask me about anything. So the word is كل شيء, constantly being mentioned here in this dua. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he made that dua again to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He asked Allah for that in Jannah. فقال لي يا أحمد, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to me, يا أحمد, هذا الجنة قم فأدخلها. This is Jannah, go ahead and enter it. فدخلت, I entered into it. فإذا أنا بسفيان الثوري, and I met Sufyan al-Thawri in Jannah. وله جناحين أخضران أن يطير بهما من نخلة إلى نخلة ومن شجرة إلى شجرة. And he has two wings of green, and he was flying from tree to tree and from branch to branch. وهو يقول الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده وأورثنا الجنة نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء. The ayah in Surah Al-Zumar. الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده. All praises be to Allah who delivered on His promise. He was truthful with His promise. And He entered us into Jannah. نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء, and we can eat from its fruits wherever we want. فنعم أجر العاملين, and what a reward for those who used to work and those who used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dream's not over. قلت ما فعل بشر الحافي. What about Bishr al-Hafi? Bishr al-Hafi radiyallahu anhu, rahimahullah, he was a worshipper in the time of Imam Ahmad, and Imam Ahmad loved him. Bishr al-Hafi. So Imam Ahmad said, Bakhin Bakh. Said, Bishr? He says, Waman mithla Bishr? Who's like Bishr? So Imam Ahmad's talking about Jannah. He says, who's like Bishr? He says, Taraktuhu bayna yaday al-Jalil. He said, I left him with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And وَفِي يَدَيْهِ مَائِدَتان مِنَ الطَّعَامِ. And he had in his hand, a table spread, or he had some plate of food. He said, وَالْجَلِيلُ مُقْبِلٌ عَلَيْهِ يَقُولُ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly saying to him, كُلْ يَا مَنْ لَمْ يَأْكُلْ وَاشْرَبْ يَا مَنْ لَمْ يَشْرَبْ وَانْعَمْ يَا مَنْ لَمْ يَنْعَمْ. Eat, O you who didn't used to eat much. Drink, O you who didn't used to drink much. Enjoy the blessings, O you who did not used to enjoy the blessings of this world. Obviously, it's a lot drier in English. I hope you guys appreciate it more in Arabic. But the point is that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, there are many dreams that were seen of him. Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, in the book of Al-Manaqib, he narrates many of them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon him, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him Jannat al-Firdaus. So let's go through now the madhab of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. First of all, his biography. As I said, Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, his biography of him, Manaqib Ahmad, is over 700 pages. Al-Dhahabi wrote 150 pages on Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala has multiple students, but how do we learn his madhab? Where do we get his fiqh from? As I said, as he passed away, everyone started to publish his masail. Everyone started to publish the things they learned from him. So there is Masail Salih, the masail of his cousin Ishaq, the masail of Abdullah. Okay? There are different masail, and basically Masail al-Imam, there were over 70 publications called Masail al-Imam, the things that the Imam was asked about. And they compiled his fiqh. Also, we see with Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, just to see, by the way, the effect, he basically was able to interact with all of the schools of thought because everything comes down to him at the end of it, right? You've got Al-Qadi Abu Yusuf, the influence of Imam Abu Hanifa, Al-Shafi'i, the influence of some of the students of Malik. he meets all of the students of the other madhabs, right? So he interacts with all of them and he gains prominence amongst them all. And also, don't forget the musnad. This is the musnad unabridged. It's huge. It's the largest collection of hadith that we have. And it starts off with all of the hadith of Abu Bakr, then all of the hadith of Umar. A musnad means by chain. It's categorized by chain. Thousands and thousands of ahadith in musnad al-Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. This right here, okay, this is a collection of all of the masail to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. So his fiqh is wide. Okay, his fiqh is wide, his ahadith are widespread. Okay, and the thing that makes Imam Ahmad rahimahullah unique as well is that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, again, he faced a government that was deviant in its ideology, so he was forced to defend the aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He was forced to defend the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. None of the other Imams were forced to do that before. Meaning, you know, as far as the aqeedah of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik and Imam al-Shafi'i, to be honest with you, it whatever group is trying to drag out some sort of opinions from them, they will. Because it's sentences here and there. Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, which is attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, doesn't have a real attribute, you know, you really can't attribute it to him and all these types of things. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, on the other hand, he wrote books to defend al-Aqeedah. He wrote as-Sunnah, right? His children wrote books to defend his Aqeedah. He wrote Ar-Rad ala Zanadiqa wal Jahmiyyah. He wrote a refutation to the Jahmiyyah of his time. So he used to write rasail in ideology and creed. And defending the orthodoxy of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now, what is his usul? So he's an imam in fiqh and he's also an imam in more than that. And before that, actually, let me show you guys his grave. This is the grave of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala in Baghdad. Now, what are his usul? What are his principles? What makes Imam Ahmad different from the others? Isn't he just a Shafi'i? Isn't a Shafi'i just a Maliki? There are some differences. Number one, the first usul for Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is an-nas, the text. Now the text means al-Quran was Sunnah. It means an-nas, and the word is used an-nas in the Hanbali madhab to show you that he doesn't differentiate between the two. The text of the Quran, the text of the authentic Sunnah. Nothing in his madhab takes precedence over al-Quran was Sunnah. So or the nas of the Quran, the Sunnah, the actual text of it. And he said that the Quran is wahi in lafz and ma'na, whereas the Sunnah is wahi in ma'na. So the Quran is revelation in both its language and its meaning. The Sunnah is revelation in its meaning. So to him, he equated again the Quran and the Sunnah. He put them on one level when it came to legislation, when it came to text. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah doesn't even consider the practice of the Sahaba in the presence of an authentic hadith. What that means is, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, unless you can confirm in his madhab that the Sahabi knew the hadith, then he'll still take the text. Now what does that mean? If Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu narrates a hadith, and his practice was different from the apparent text of the hadith, then you'll take the opinion, you'll take what Ibn Umar did and you'll say that it's a different context. All right, in Hanbali fiqh. All right. However, there is the possibility that some ahadith were not heard and things of that sort by some of the companions, and that is something that took place. And actually, I'm going to tell you guys about something that I'm going to do with you guys, inshallah ta'ala, at some point before you leave from Dream, inshallah. But as far as the hadith text and how you get the hadith text and things of that sort, he doesn't consider the khilaf of the Sahaba unless the Sahaba were confirmed to know the hadith. There were times that are established where some of the Sahaba did not know some things that were said to the Prophet ﷺ to other companions. That's not an insult to the companions, it's a fact. All right? When everything got sort of consolidated, when things were put together, and when the Sahaba, you find, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu made a great effort. If someone claimed to hear a hadith that he didn't hear before, then he'll get the Sahaba together and he'll see if someone else heard it, and so on and so forth. When it was all consolidated, then it's all there. Now, what if Imam Ahmad sees an authentic hadith, and there's qawl Sahabi that we know knew the hadith? There's a statement of a Sahabi, then he assumes the hadith to be mansukh. Then he says the hadith is abrogated or it's out of context. Okay? There's a context to it. But in his madhab, al-hadith hujjatun bi nafsihi, hadith is a proof in and of itself, no matter what the Sahaba are doing. And again, we said Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, who's one of the main scholars of the Hanbali school, he wrote a book called Sihhatu Madhab Ahl al-Madina. Sihhatu Madhab Ahl al-Madina. basically the proof or the correctness of the madhab of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala when it came to the people of Medina. So Ibn Taymiyyah preferred to also take into consideration the people of Medina and what they would say. Now Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, when it comes to ijma', this is also something very important in his usul. Okay? When it comes to the concept of ijma', Imam Ahmad had a problem with it. What was the problem with it? Okay? The problem is not with the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة, that my ummah doesn't agree upon something that's wrong. Consensus is a proof. Imam Ahmad's problem was that people would claim ijma' without doing their due research. Meaning what? The people of Iraq knew only one opinion and they would say, this is ijma'. And when they said it was ijma', it shut the door for others when they had other evidence to prove that it wasn't ijma'. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah said, as the ummah spread, people started to do that. They started to just, when they heard of one fatwa in their area for such a long time, they said this is the ijma' of the ummah. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he said, don't say ijma', instead say, لا نعلم خلافا في ذلك. We don't know of anything that opposes this. Because when you say لا نعلم خلافا في ذلك, that we don't know of anything that opposes this, then you leave the door open. So if a hadith comes up, right? If it comes to be that some companions had an opinion that we were previously unaware of, people don't shut the door on it and say, ijma', it's already closed. And by the way, this is a contentious point within the within the Hanbali madhab, because Imam Ahmad rahimahullah had strong words for people. He said, "Man da'a al-ijma' faqad kadhib." The people that are claiming ijma' have lied, because he pointed out some faults in it. He pointed out some holes where people would say ijma' on an issue, then he'd find a different opinion. And so, for example, the fatwa of Ibn Taymiyyah, who comes later on triple talaq. All right, 3 talaqs in one sitting equals either a revocable talaq or an irrevocable talaq. And if you say 3 in one gathering, if you say talaq 3 times in one gathering, is it over or does it count as 1? Does it count as 1 or does it count as 3? Now, according to the 4 Imams, it counts as 3. All right? So if you say talaq 3 times in one sitting, or if you say talaq multiple times in one sitting, it establishes talaq. All right? Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, though, again, he leaves the door open when it comes to the idea of consensus. A hadith was narrated in Sahih Muslim, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that we used to consider 3 talaqs in one sitting as 1. And that was in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr. But Umar radiallahu anhu saw people taking the issue of talaq lightly, so Umar enforced that. And this is something that's allowed to do. And again, the public welfare. He enforced that if you were to say talaq 3 times in one, then you would be separated for good. Because he didn't want people to start getting too loose with the words of talaq. And he said it continued that way. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that opens a door. That opens a door. Now, in the usul of Imam Ahmad, the door is not shut. It's never shut because there's an authentic narration now, either from a companion, and it's Ibn Abbas speaking, but there's an authentic narration now. So Ibn Rushd rahimahullah ta'ala, in Bidayat al-Mujtahid, Ibn Rushd, who's the great comparative scholar, he's not a Hanbali, but he says that it shouldn't have been claimed a consensus, it should have been said the majority of scholars, because it was the opinion of the majority. It continued on in the ummah for a very long time, but to claim consensus was wrong. And the interesting thing, by the way, is that everyone gets mad at, people criticize Ibn Taymiyyah for this fatwa, like harshly. Like they try to delegitimize him and they say, Khalif al-Ijma', he spoke against the consensus. But even the great institutions in the world, they all enforce his fatwa because it's just more practical, it's more pragmatic. So even in Egypt, for example, where the traditional schools and Al-Azhar, they criticize Ibn Taymiyyah for this, but the official position in Egypt and Al-Azhar is that 3 talaqs in one sitting is 1. Because, you practically cannot enforce that. In our day and age, that would mean destruction. To enforce that rule wholesale, that if someone says talaq and they've got kids and things of that sort, it's over for good, it would be destruction. So even the people that disagree with Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa, which again stays true to Hanbali principles. It does stay true to Hanbali principles. You can argue about it, but I would argue it does stay true to Hanbali principles because Imam Ahmad didn't shut the door of ijma'. They still will practice that as well. Now, what does he say about as-sahaba, qawl as-sahaba? So we have al-Qur'an wal-hadith, an-nas. All right? Ijma' is not technically asl there, but he does consider it. He does consider it, but he says that he says that, don't shut the door on it. Don't use ijma' to shut the door on people. But the third official one is as-sahaba. Now here's Imam Ahmad rahimahullah's approach to the sahaba. Okay? Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala says that the opinion of one companion that no other companion was known to deal with is law. Meaning what? If Ibn Abbas said something about a mas'ala and none of the other sahaba approached it, then he said you have to take it. You have to take it. Okay? So that's the asl in his madhab. Why? Because they know better than us. They know better than us. So if one companion said it and other companions did not disagree with him, then essentially that's to be enforced as law. When he was asked, what do we do if the Sahaba differ? Do we go to our ijtihad? Can we choose and things of that sort? And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he took issue with the statement of نحن هم رجال ونحن رجال, they are men and we are men. He said, بل نحن أطفال, we're just children. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, in his concept, he doesn't go after not finding an opinion of the companions. Where does he go to? And this is what makes his madhab unique, by the way. Where does he go to after not finding an opinion from the companions? Where does he go? He goes to al-hadith al-mursal wal-da'if. A hadith that have weakness in them. This is a very interesting concept. Now you have to understand, al-hadith al-mursal, what is a mursal hadith? Does anyone know what a mursal hadith means? The missing link of the sahabi. So for example, Imam Hassan al-Basri narrates something from the Prophet ﷺ. Hassan al-Basri never met the Prophet ﷺ. However, if there is an authentic chain of, practically the entire seerah is like this, by the way. All right? Ibn Ishaq did this a lot. All right? Where the chain of narrators is thiqah, that all the narrators are trustworthy, but the missing link is the sahabi. But if it's confirmed that a trustworthy person heard something from Imam Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala, you're pretty confident that it's still truthful. But still, for hadith purposes, it's not going to be classed as a sahih hadith because of the missing link. It's still not going to be classed that way. It's hadith mursal. So essentially, because the grading system of at-Tirmidhi, which came later on, which sort of graded Hasan hadiths, Hasan lidati, Hasan li ghayrihi, things that were Hasan in and of themselves, ahadith that were okay. They're acceptable in and of themselves, or an ahadith that are okay because of the amount of times they've been narrated, and the trustworthiness of some of those narrations and so on and so forth. Essentially when we say in the hadith of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, that which he will accept, these are the types of hadith he will accept. Hadith where there is no narrator that is muttaham. There is no narrator that's accused of being a fabricator or a liar. No narrator that makes things up and things of that sort. So all of the people in the chain are acceptable. They're good narrators, but there's a missing link somewhere. He says, I'd rather take that than the opinion of man. Meaning there's a greater chance of this being right than the opinion of you and I. Okay? Now, what that does in the madhab of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is that Imam Ahmad, you can find that, he'd mention 70 opinions on a mas'ala, but he wouldn't choose one unless there was a hadith for it. So for example, a mas'ala is presented to him, a question is presented to him, he'll say all the opinions about it, but at the end of it, he'll just say, Allah knows best. Because he didn't want to confirm an opinion unless he found a hadith for it. And that was his strategy, was to go and find a hadith for it. And yes, you can go into the context of hadith and all those types of things. It is taken into consideration. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala does have a concept of qiyas, asl of qiyas, but it's called al-qiyas fi darura. To use analogy only a necessity. Al-qiyas fi darura. Now here's the interesting thing. He was asked about his position on qiyas, analogy, because Imam Malik rahimahullah essentially completely shut the door. Imam Ash-Shafi'i opened it up. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he limited it. All right, so he took sort of a position between Malik and Ash-Shafi'i, but Imam Ahmad says, I asked Ash-Shafi'i about qiyas, and Ash-Shafi'i said you should only do it when it's necessary. So Imam Ahmad traced this asl to Ash-Shafi'i. He said that al-qiyas takun fi darura. You should only use analogy when you have to. So he's asked by the students, what do we do if we don't find Quran, we don't find an authentic hadith, we don't find qawl sahabi, we don't find hadith mursal or da'if, with some little weakness in it. What do we do then? That's when he said, يفتي بما وافق الكتاب والسنة بشرط ألا يتقول على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, then he gives fatwa in accordance with the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He looks at the analogies and so on and so forth. He considers reasoning and stuff like that. But on the condition that he does not attribute those things to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because a lot of times these opinions became attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, بِشَرْطْ أَلَّا يَتَقَوَّلَ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Don't make this divine, don't make it legislation. At the end of the day, it's your opinion, and do not make the people bound by it. Now, what's the difference between Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala and this madhab and the Zahiri madhab, for example, the literalist madhab? Okay? The Zahiris completely reject qiyas. Completely reject any form of analogy, any form of reasoning. They completely reject context of a hadith. The Hanbalis do not reject context of a hadith. They reject the context of a hadith. They will take it literal. And they believe in a principle that's called istishab. Istishab means what in the Arabic language? Does anyone know? It means continuity. In essence, to the Zahiris, how do they solve the problems when we're not allowed to give a fatwa on anything and we're not... Basically, whatever was taking place before the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet ﷺ remained silent about, then it became law, which is a very problematic concept. Okay? The customs that the Prophet ﷺ didn't say anything about, just continue at that point. All right, that's a very simple, look, I'm giving you guys very simplistic even answers about istihsan from Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and istishab and al-masalih wal-mafasid. These are very, I'm just giving you guys a very basic explanation of them because this isn't a fiqh or usul al-fiqh class at the end of the day, right? But the point is that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is in essence a madhab of hadith. It's a madhab of hadith. It's a madhab of the authentic hadith and even the slightly weak hadith, but I prefer that to my own opinion and things of that sort. As we said, his works in fiqh spread, as well as, or his opinions in fiqh spread, as well as his opinions in aqeedah. Now, his books in fiqh, or not his books, but the books that were written in Hanbali fiqh, there's a man that's very important, by the way. His name is Imam Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi. Imam Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala is the man. This guy is probably, I mean, subhanAllah, he's one of the most unappreciated or underappreciated scholars in Islamic history. Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, he wrote several books in Hanbali fiqh. So he wrote, for example, he wrote beginner, intermediate, and advanced level books. So he had a whole span of books of fiqh that he wrote. He wrote Al-Umda. Al-Umda is like beginners' acts of worship, tahara and salah and those types of things, the beginners' acts of worship. And by the way, one of my teachers, Sheikh Hatim al-Hajj, translated it, and you can find Al-Umda by Hatim al-Hajj, and his footnotes make it better than even the Arabic text, honestly, because Sheikh Hatim put in footnotes and things of that sort. So you can find, Al-Umda by Sheikh Hatim, the translation by Sheikh Hatim. Then he went further than Al-Umda, just to show you his train of thought. He went from Al-Umda to Al-Udda. Al-Udda, Sharh Al-Umda. So he explained Al-Umda and he made a bigger text and called it Al-Udda. Okay? Then after Al-Udda, he writes Al-Muqni'. Al-Muqni' is to study the rajih of the Hanbali madhab, the most authentic opinion or the most accepted opinion, or the correct opinion in the Hanbali madhab through masail, not through dala'il. Meaning you just take the question and you don't go through the evidences. It basically just lists out, explains the opinions of Imam, of the most correct opinion in the Hanbali madhab in each thing. And then finally he wrote, and this is what's amazing about what he did, he wrote a book called Al-Mughni. Kitab Al-Mughni. Now here's the thing about Al-Mughni. In Al-Mughni, he included the opinions of the other madhabs as well. Okay? And here's what makes this work so unique. Usually when one madhab, or when the scholar of one madhab writes a book and they include the opinions of the other madhabs, they kind of try to put those opinions down. Ibn Qudama fairly puts basically comparative fiqh. He puts the Hanbali opinion, which is his madhab, and he puts all of their opinions as well, the other madhabs as well. And Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, who's a Shafi'i, he says that what Ibn Qudama did, the fairness that Ibn Qudama displayed in his documenting the Shafi'i madhab was so much, people called him, people used to say that he's a Hanbali, he's a alim of the Hanbali school. They would say, no, he's a alim of the Shafi'i school, because of how fair he was in documenting the opinions of the other scholars. Okay, so Al-Mughni is a masterpiece in fiqh. It hasn't been translated, unfortunately. And then you have some other ones. Now, obviously, I just wanted to mention Ibn Qudama. He was a scholar in Syria, in Asham. This is the masjid, this is the madrasa, as-Salihiyya. This was the school that Ibn Qudama used to teach from in Asham. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to liberate it. Allahumma ameen. Now, obviously, the Hanbali madhab went through some changes and things of that sort. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala comes later on. Now before that, you have many, many different Hanbali scholars. You have Al-Imam Al-Khiraqi, Al-Imam Al-Khallal, Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la. Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la was born into a Hanafi school and became a Hanbali, and he wrote the usul. He documented the usul of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. And you have others that came. You have Al-Imam Al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Al-Harawi comes and he died in the year 481 after Hijrah. So he's one of the earlier ones. He's before Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Al-Qayyim. The madhab sort of changes after Ibn Taymiyyah in a way. And Abu Ismail Al-Harawi, he's one of the, he's also considered, one of the great scholars of Tazkiyah. Okay? He wrote the book Manazir As-Sa'irin. Manazir As-Sa'irin. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah's book Madarij As-Salikin is basically a summary of this book, which is Manazir As-Sa'irin. And he has a statement, by the way. He says, أنا حنبلي ما حييت فإن أمت فوصيتي للناس أن يتحنبلوا. He says that I'm a Hanbali as long as I live, and if I die, then my wasiyah to people is that they all become Hanabila, that they all join the madhab of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. That's his legacy to the people, if you will. Okay, some other famous ones, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah ta'ala, the great scholar, Sultan al-Ulama. Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah ta'ala was a Hanbali. He was a Hanbali faqih, a Hanbali scholar. Then you had Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, you had Ibn Qudama, and then you had the grandfather and the father of Ibn Taymiyyah. So you had the grandfather who was Majd ad-Din Ibn Taymiyyah, who was also a great scholar. Assalamu alaikum Shaykh Hassan. And then you had Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he obviously is a mujtahid in and of himself. He's a scholar in and of himself, but he still remains true to Hanbali principles. And an important book there in the madhab that I'll mention here is a book called Al-Furu'. Al-Furu'. Al-Furu' was written, and this is the last book I'll give you guys because I kind of, I think, gave you too many of them. Al-Furu', I'm trying to convert you guys. Al-Furu' is written by Al-Imam Ibn Muflih. And what Ibn Muflih did in Al-Furu' is very interesting. He basically weaves together the opinions of Ibn Taymiyyah and the opinions of the Hanbali scholars before Ibn Taymiyyah. So it's the first book that sort of combines basically the changes in the madhab and weaving those opinions together. But he again, he does remain a great scholar of the Hanbali school. And you have many poems that were written, obviously, about Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, about Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, and things of that sort. Now, the Hanbali madhab, unlike the other madhabs that we covered, it didn't spread as much as the other ones. And there's a saying amongst the Hanabila, they say, يَقُولُونَ فِي أَصْحَابِ أَحْمَدِ قِلَّةٌ فَقُلْتُ لَهُمْ إِنَّ الْكِرَامَ قَلِيلٌ. They say that the companions of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala are very little, so I said to them that the companions, that the lesser of number, or the noble ones, are always lesser in number. The noble ones are always the least. So they take offense to this idea that they are less. Now, we've covered, where everything else spread and things of that sort. Now, the Hanbali madhab, it spread in different places. Interestingly enough, again, the Hanbali madhab, it actually used to find its stronghold. Abu al-Hasan Nadwi rahimahullah ta'ala says, it found its stronghold in places where people were under oppression. So it found its stronghold in Syria. There was a significant Hanbali movement in Afghanistan. Okay, it remained in Al-Hijaz, obviously, as we'll mention, in Syria. And a lot of because the Hanbalis at that time, and this is how you study, again, the irony of it, when you study the Hanabila in the past, a lot of them also tended towards the healthy science of at-tasawwuf, the healthy science of tazkiyah. So you had Imam Abdul Qadir, you had, after Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Al-Qayyim, Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala. So it was a very spiritual madhab. It's called madhab al-wara'. The madhab of safety, if you will. It was considered a madhab where you avoid things that are doubtful and you avoid the haram. And that's why it's kind of viewed as a very strict madhab, right? Now obviously there were fights and we said that the political turmoil usually spread which two madhabs? The Shafi'i and the Hanafi madhab. Just historically speaking, Ad-Dawla al-Uthmaniyya being the last one, being the Shafi'i madhab there. But you will still find places, pockets, all the time of, what was that? The Ottoman Empire, yeah, it was a Hanafi. So that's what I'm saying. It spread through these two different, through these different empires. Salah ad-Din took the madhab to Egypt as well, and to much of the Muslim world, the Shafi'i madhab. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, as we said, there were the aqa'id, the creed battles as well that took place in some of the turf wars. Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala actually joined Salah ad-Din. So he actually fought under Salah ad-Din. So even though they had disagreements in Aqidah, Ibn Qudama being an Athari, Salah ad-Din being an Ash'ari, and then the fiqh disagreements, which were irrelevant at that point, Ibn Qudama joined Salah ad-Din and he fought in the army of Salah ad-Din, which shows you that they could get their act together when they needed to get their act together. This wasn't something that they used to fight with one another and things of that sort. And we should also have that same spirit. Now, obviously, the Hanbali madhab is very small. It remains in some manifestation, in the Gulf regions. Also, some manifestation in Afghanistan. In Palestine, actually, interestingly enough, my father's from Tulkarm in Palestine. Tulkarm was considered, it's considered the cradle of the Hanbalis in Palestine. So everyone grows up in Tulkarm, a Hanbali basically, right? But what's amazing about it is that when you go to Palestine, when you go to some of these areas, they argue about or they don't argue about it, but they'll proudly say that I'm Hanbali Shafi'i, but they all pray like Hanafis. And it just, because the textbooks and things that they were taught, like none of them will do rafa' yadayn and things of that sort, but to them, Shafi'i, Hanbali is like, if a dog licks your clothes, how many times you have to wash it and things of that sort. It's some of those masail that they define themselves by. And I found it really amazing, because I'd go there and when you go to Palestine and Jordan, they'll say that, we were Hanabila and we are Shafi'is and so on and so forth, but they all pray like Hanafis, okay? Which again, subhanAllah, these things obviously should be healthy in that regard. But this is essentially where it spread to, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on all of our Imams, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us to be a part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and with these beloved Imams, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the truth wherever it may be. Allahumma ameen.